Have you been to Jesus for the cleansing power? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you fully trusting in His grace this hour? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you washed in the blood? In the blood, in the soul cleansing blood of the Lamb. Are your garments spotless? Are they white as snow? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you walking daily by the Savior's side? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Do you rest each moment in the crucified? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you washed in the blood? In the blood, in the soul cleansing blood of the Lamb. Are your garments spotless? Are they white as snow? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? When the bridegroom cometh, will your robes be white, pure and white in the blood of the Lamb? Will your soul be ready for the mansions bright, and be washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you washed in the blood? In the blood, in the soul cleansing blood of the Lamb. Are your garments spotless? Are they white as snow? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Lay aside the garments that are stained with sin, and be washed in the blood of the Lamb. There's a fountain flowing for the soul unclean. Oh, be washed in the blood of the Lamb. Are you washed in the blood? In the blood, in the soul cleansing blood of the Lamb. Are your garments spotless? Are they white as snow? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb?
All right. Well, it's an interesting world out there that we live in today. That is for sure. And, excuse me. But I want to kind of bring you some perspective today, and I hope you're listening. You may not agree. Listen, let me tell you a few things here that is more than likely going to happen during this broadcast. As far as some people go. Here's the thing. Number one, let me say this. I'm going to take some heat from some people today for this. All of my tinfoil hat friends, and I have many, and I'm in your club, believe me, most of the time. I'm going to take some heat from them. I'm going to take some heat from a lot of people, probably for this. But again, I'm just going to bring you some facts today. I'm going to bring you some of these because I think some people just, all right, I'm just going to say it. Some of you seriously need to dial back on the Alex Jones injections into your bloodstream, okay? You need to chill just a little bit. All right? I get the hypervigilance. I get the desire to be careful, to watch government, never to trust them. I get all that, okay? I understand that. But at the same time, if you're not careful, you'll get to a point where reality just isn't there. And you get beyond reality where it's like you're just kind of swimming somewhere in like your own reality, and not all of us can live in that land. I mean, it's nice and all to visit there, but it's not a place that we can stay in. You know, here's the thing. There's a lot of people that wouldn't really like to bring up some of these facts today. But I think we need a historical perspective on this. Number one, we're a bunch of weenies, okay? We're a bunch of big babies. I'm just going to go out and say it. We're just a bunch of big babies. If you tell us one thing we can't do, we just simply do it out of defiance. Not because it's right to do, but just because we don't like people telling us not to do something. That's human nature. The second thing about that is that, you know, you need some like perspective. Has this happened before? You know, and I want to show you some things today that I think are going to surprise you, but I think it ought to ease you a little bit too. I'm not saying I'm going to give you all the answers you're going to walk away and be like, wow. I'm going to say I'm going to give you some perspective. Some historic perspective. You may not agree with all my conclusions. I'm certainly okay with that. I'm okay with you not agreeing with all my conclusions. In fact, I don't even know if I agree with all my conclusions. But what I want to do, is give you something to think about. Now, number one, you don't have to like what's going on right now. Did you know that? You actually don't have to like it. You don't have to like it. It's okay that you don't like it. Let's all do therapy and you can say, okay, I don't like it. That's okay. You don't have to like it. I don't either. Right? I don't either. I don't like it either. You don't have to like it. It's okay. But guess what? There are things in life that you're going to be forced to do that you're not going to like. It's okay. You won't like it. That's okay. Let's get through that already. That, hey man, it's all right. I don't like it. I just think it sucks. It's okay. You don't have to like it. You don't have to. Okay, that's number one. So you don't have to like it. Number two, whether you like it or not, it's here. So let's deal with reality for a second. How about we deal with reality? And now, the way we want things to be, the way we're hoping things to be, how about we get strong in the Lord and in the power of his might, and we confront the giant head on and say, this is reality. All right, this is what we're dealing with. Let's go to the scriptures here for a second. The thing that hath been is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun. I can't help it with the glitch. I can take my camera off and change it. I can try to change it. I don't know if I can do the screen without it. I don't know if there's another screen. I can't help it. I can't do anything about it unless I end the broadcast and start over, and I really don't want to do that. So I don't know what else to do unless I turn the camera off. I don't know. But let's deal with reality. Let's deal with what we're facing and not what we want it to be, not what we're hoping it is, not that everything's fake and everybody's lying and nobody gets sick. Okay? So we can't do anything about that. Okay. We need to be people that know the times and understand what we're dealing with. Okay? David Ickus, the glitch does make me like Max Headroom. I know that. But that's okay. Except the white and black beard here. We're to know and understand the times. And I get it that some people live in places that this is not going to affect as greatly. I get that. And I get there's going to be people in this country or people, my friends, some of my friends, he's selling out to the New World Order. He's doing, I mean, if you think that, you're just dumb, okay? How about you think that I'm just being practical? That I'm just going to deal with some facts here. Okay? And that I want you to have some perspective. Why? Because I want you to calm down a little bit. I want you to calm down a little bit. That's what I want you to do. If I can help you to calm down and just, not that it's all, look, I can't give you a magic pill and make it all go away. Heaven is the only thing that can make it all go away for you right now. But God has chosen for us to be here for such a time as this. Does that make sense? That we're here for this is our time to be here. And I really hope that if the Lord tarries is coming, that we don't look back at 50 years from now and we look like a bunch of whining babies that didn't get our Starbucks. Do you understand what I mean? Like that we didn't face this as God-fearing holy people, but we face it as a bunch of whiners and babies that didn't get what we wanted all the time, so we couldn't handle absolutely any adversity. Right? This broadcast is not to determine whether this is a grand conspiracy. I'm not even going down that road. That's not what I'm here to talk about today. I'm not here to talk about whether the government uses this for its advantage, because I got news for you. Governments always use things for their advantage. That's not the crux of the issue. What I want to do is show you some things that happened in the world during the Spanish flu. I want to show you some things that happened and say, oh, well, that's not a whole lot different. That's not a whole lot different than look at this. This is the scripture I was looking for. And of the children of Issachar, which were men that had understanding of the times, to know what Israel ought to do. The heads of them were 200, and all their brethren were at their commandment. Now, I'm giving you a principle here. Well, honestly, we are kind of as a world. I'm not talking about a new world order or the same spirit. I'm saying as human beings, we are in this together as human beings. I'm not speaking of a spiritual one. You have a responsibility as a child of God. If there is somebody in your sphere that needs your help, you have a responsibility as a God-fearing child of God to help people. So in that sense, we are. In the sense of a one world government or a spiritual new world order, of course we're not. But as a child of God, yes, you have a responsibility to love one another. You have a responsibility to help others in your community. Yes, you do have a responsibility to do that in that sense. What did Jesus say about the Good Samaritan? You know, think about those things. Of course, who is my neighbor, right? There is a responsibility. So I think that perspective and understanding is important. You got to be careful because just because somebody wrong says something right doesn't mean I don't have to use my brain and agree with what is right. Am I making any sense to anybody today? I hope I am. I hope I'm making practical sense to you today. Because that's what I'm trying to tell you, that we've got to use some practical common sense and biblical wisdom that God gives us. Let me see. I want to find, not that one. Not that one. That's not the one I'm looking for. There's one I'm looking for. Hang on a second. Oh, I wonder if I did that. Let's see. Hang on a second. Here it is. I think this is it right here, probably. Yep, this is it. Okay. So now that we laid those ground rules down, I'm not secretly working for the New World Order. I'm not trying to unite the whole world in one religion. I don't have 666 written on the back of my forehead, or on the back of my forehead, on my forehead. I'm not trying to get you to unite with the Pope in Rome. I'm not trying to get you to do anything. I'm just trying to use some practical common sense. Okay? Does that make sense? Are you with me so far in that? Hope you are. Okay. Hopefully you get it. Then once we glitch. It's the flicker rate. He's doing something secret with the New World Order with the flicker rate. Okay, I'm sorry. I have to say things like that just because. Well, just because. So, anyway. All right, so here we go. Let's get to it. Let's start with where I'm from. I'm from the Quad Cities. And the Spanish flu hit the Quad City area, and I didn't know this, by the way. I did not know any of this. But the Spanish flu hit the Quad Cities when I was not when I was a kid, I'd be like 100 years old, but when back in 1918 to 1920 is when the Spanish flu hit. So did we ever do any quarantine, social distancing, anything like that? Or is this all just new with the New World Order conspiracy to bring down everything and to make sure you don't go to work and just give you a free check? I don't think so. I think it's went on for a while, and I'm going to prove that to you. I'm going to prove that to you here. This is the Quad City Times. This is where I'm from. 102 years ago, the Spanish flu slammed the Quad Cities, Here's what it teaches us about pandemics. Alfred Russell died of influenza on November 8th, 1918. He was just 5 years old. Russell, who lived in Davenport, was the youngest of 7 children, but his funeral was lonely. His mom, 4 sisters, and 2 brothers were stuck in the hospital battling the same virus that killed Alfred, according to newspapers. The 1918 outbreak of influenza, known as the Spanish flu, was one of the deadliest pandemics in world history. The 1918 outbreak, okay, so look at that. It killed somewhere between 20 and 75 million people. In the U.S., an estimated 675,000 died from the flu. Okay? Now, these numbers are talked about everywhere, so it's not just new. Or it's not just this article. In the Quad Cities, 5-year-old Alfred Russell was hardly alone. From the first reported flu death in early October 1918 to the epidemic wane in the summers of 1919, thousands were infected across eastern Iowa and western Illinois. 102 years later, at a moment of heightened alarm about COVID-19, the new coronavirus sweeping the globe and upending daily life, Americans are confronted what many have called an unprecedented situation. But the coronavirus has a useful if imperfect precedent in the 1918 outbreak. I want you to think about this, okay? That flu was different in several key respects from the new coronavirus. By the best evidence, the 1918 flu was deadlier than COVID-19, whereas the coronavirus targets the elderly. The 1918 flu ruthlessly killed not just the very old and very young, but also healthy young adults. Public health was also less widely understood and practiced a century ago by the general public. Still, themes emerge over time. Now, people complain that officials were overreacting. Extreme action, including the closure of whole towns, began before many people had died. The pandemic of 1918 is not a perfect guide to the 2020, but a review of how the Quad Cities handled it. So this is interesting to me because this is where I'm from, and these people are low-key, normal ham and eggers. I mean, they're not like Chicago, okay? An epidemic editorial in the Moline Dispatch opined in November 1918, many take as many lives in a month as fierce war would take in 2 years. And there is no return for it except the things regarding it, which medical science may be able to find out in order to combat the next reoccurrence. Lesson 1. There are different hypotheses about whether the so-called Spanish flu, where it originated. We don't care about that really that much at this point. By April, news reports began reaching the Quad Cities that influenza was circulating among soldiers. On July 4th, 1918, an editorial in the Rock Island Argus decried the epidemic of Spanish influenza, threatening to invade this country. The problem, it was believed, was mostly limited to military camps and bases. A local outbreak began to be taken seriously in the late September. Then more than 2,000 men fell sick at the Great Lakes Naval Station near North Chicago. Camp Grant outside Rockford was hit next. It wasn't until October 4th, 9 months after the first case in the U.S., that the Davenport Daily Times reported the first non-military fatality, a 60-year-old pharmacist. To some at that time, the death was tragic but isolated. Influenza is not spreading, read the headline in the Daily Times. Rock Island had only 8 cases, with some local authorities interpreted to be evident that the disease is not spreading to any extent in Rock Island. So, are you starting to hear the same themes? Oh, don't worry about it. It's no big deal. October 7th, Davenport is practically free from influenza. There's no reason for alarm. The next day it was reported Moline was lucky because the diseases had not appeared in epidemic form. At the same time, papers carried advice on how to stay well. The preventative measures would seem familiar to a modern person. Be cool and calm, but careful. Keep away from people with colds. Cover or smother every cough or sneeze. Keep out of crowds. Avoid poorly ventilated places. Above all things, panic should be avoided. Almost exactly 1 month later, the city of Rock Island alone had 1,400 total cases and about 50 deaths. Moline averaged 30 new cases a day, more than a month. That's one town. In Davenport, which is right across the river, like 2 miles away, the totals were higher. One particular summer day logged 202 new flu cases in a 24-hour period. Lesson 2. By the second week of October, the epidemic had reached more than 800 cities and towns across Illinois. In the Quad Cities, there were only a handful of cases, but disaster signs were mounting. Reports poured in. Widespread death at military facilities in Iowa, Dubuque, Iowa City, and in Dubuque and Geneseo. That's my hometown. That's where I was raised. That's where I went to school. I'm trying to give you some perspective. I'm not saying we ought to be afraid, because most of the time, healthy people, they're fine with this flu. But it isn't unprecedented that we would do quarantines and things, and that's what people think. Perspective, people. That's what I'm trying to give you. Perspective, historical perspective. You don't have to agree with it all about what was done, but you can't ignore the facts that are there. Again, you don't have to like it. I don't like it either. You know what I'm saying, Andrea? You're from Iowa. You know what I'm saying. So health officials of the Tri-City area, that's what they called the Quad Cities back then. My aunt used to call it the Tri-Cities. It was so funny. Anyway, until it became the Quad Cities. That the Daily Times called the most drastic order that has ever been issued. Listen to this. Health officials of the Tri-Cities area proclaim what the Daily Times called the most drastic order that has ever been issued. A near total shutdown of urban life. All libraries, movie houses, theaters, churches. Ding, 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 ding. You see this? It's not just, it's an attack on the churches to try to shut them down. That's what it is. I hate to break it to you, okay? But in the eyes of the world, it's a way bigger deal that you shut off their basketball games, their baseball games, and their football games. They just lost billions of dollars of revenue. Do you understand that? Am I getting through to you? Am I making sense to you? It's not just... And I hear people say, well, Walmart's open. Yeah, for food and necessities. Are you paying attention? But there isn't 300 people in a mega church, or 3,000 people in a mega church auditorium. There isn't 70,000 people together. In one building. You're going there getting food. You're 6 feet away and you're leaving. That's not the same as us at church when we sit here all day together for 8 hours on a Sunday, all in the same room. Pool rooms, bowling alleys, sports venues, colleges, and most schools were closed. Public gatherings were prohibited, and even funerals were limited to immediate family. Okay, let's talk about that. Jen said de Blasio threatened to shut any church that violated his order down permanently. Well, number one, he can't. He's a jackass, okay? Let me say it again. He's a jackass, and he's using this. He's trying to scare them so they wake up and close their doors in the meantime. When this is all blows over, the constitutional arguments will come into play. That guy's going to get his short suit off of him, and the church is not going to be closed because they can't do that, okay? That's reality. There is a constitutional process. They're going to do what they want to right now, but they're going to get caught up. Now, let's keep going. All right? Does that make sense? Is anybody out there like hearing me? Okay. Am I speaking Greek or is it normal? And I'm not coming down on you, Jen, for what you said. I'm not coming down on you. I'm telling you, he's a jackass, and he's overstepping his bounds, and he'll get the whooping he needs later. Okay, in Rock Island and Moline, businesses had a curfew of 6:30 p.m. In Davenport, most businesses had to close at 5 p.m. The Davenport mayor instructed police to arrest anyone violating the orders. Unanimously. Elected officials in Davenport, Rock Island, Moline, East Moline, Silva supported it. That's where I'm from, all those little towns. I know every picture exhibitor and theater manager in Davenport will suffer as a result, said the manager of one local theater. But it is our duty to safeguard the public health of the community. And for this reason, I believe we should close. The rules were followed. After a week of quarantine, the Rock Island Argus reported no violations citywide. And by the way, let me just stop here and say something because I got to throw this in there. There's some churches out there that are 501c3s that are fighting the government and staying open. You guys are a bunch of hypocrites because you signed a paper that made you a creature of the state. You agreed to be a creature of the state, and now you're acting like you're taking a big stand. No, you're not. It's hypocrisy. Anyway, that was free. Didn't cost you anything. You can be mad at me if you want to, but that's my life. I'm used to it. Okay, ready to move on. The rules were followed. Oh my goodness, I'm going to need 4 hours for this. And I'm not going to have a voice left because I keep preaching. Okay, all right, I got to chill. The rules were followed after a week of quarantine. The Rock Island Argus reported no violations citywide. Protection of the public health just now is a patriotic duty as well as a personal safeguard, read an editorial in the Argus. And public health officials were mostly satisfied. Containment appeared to be mitigating the transmission of disease. 3 weeks after the closure orders, Moline had seen fewer than 1,000 total cases, and Rock Island only about 1,400. High figures, but better than what the cities endured. Okay? Lesson 3, it ain't over till it's over. Almost immediately, officials faced pressure to lift the closure orders. Some locals believed the response was an overreaction. Others thought it stifled the very soul of the local area. One Rock Island reverend was irate at the prohibition of Sunday services. My God and my church come first, he thundered at local leaders. Thanks to the drastic actions. And I get it, okay? I get it. Thanks to the drastic actions, the number of new cases was dropping every day during the citywide closures. By the first week in November, Moline, Rock Island were averaging about 25 new cases each day. East Moline about 15 and Davenport about 70, according to the newspaper reports. Health officials were content that the containment was working. The Moline Dispatch reported Moline, Rock Island, East Moline adopted the most stringent quarantine orders at all Illinois cities. winning the praise of the director of the Illinois Health Department. That there were so few cases and comparatively few deaths was due in large part, according to state health officials, to the wise and timely preventive measures adopted by the health officials. Severe action was lauded for yielding. All I'm saying is, don't follow Rodney Howard Brown for staying open. Those guys are heretics. And they're doing it to drag people down. They got devils in them the size of Kentucky or Chicago, okay? And I'm telling you right now, those guys are leading people off a cliff on purpose. They're going to walk with all this stuff and not get in any trouble. But I'm going to tell you something right now. If something happens in that church with an outbreak like that among all those people, we'll see how good his charismatic powers work. The number of cases of the diseases and percentage of death have been lower in the Tri-Cities, in parts of Iowa or Illinois where any epidemic. Anyway, so I'm not going to read all of it, but in Moline, the mayor was reportedly perturbed about the new epidemic. It came back. They had to deal with it. They had to be vigilant. Vigilant. There is a deplorable tendency on the part of the public to let down the safeguards. Said the Illinois State Health Director, only eternal vigilance can stamp out influenza. So some of them didn't close after the new epidemic. Some of them stayed open. In Davenport, strict closings orders were re-implemented to shut down businesses. And by the end of the year, Davenport had reported 270 deaths. Rock Island, 3,167 and 114 deaths. Good information can save lives. Bad information, cannot. So anyway, can cause detriment. Okay, he says here, the germs, like the Germans, celebrate the coming of spring with a tremendous assault, the editorial warned. It would be literally equivalent to a great military victory or the raising of a great army if we'd all stopped the nasty practice of coughing and sneezing into other people's faces and spitting germs all over the neighborhood. Okay, so lots of individual decisions matter, stuff like that. Anyway, so all right. So I'm not gonna read this anymore because I got so much more. I just thought that was neat. That's a perspective from somewhere. Nobody can be. By the way, as far as evictions go, nobody can be evicted. At least the process can't start until May. And that's the starting of the process. That's what was said. So nobody's going to get evicted. Okay. The next one I want to bring you. I want to show you something else here. Ready to take a trip down memory lane? Well, not our memory, but somebody else's. This during the Spanish influenza. This was going on. All right? I want to give you some perspective. Of course, government can use things. I'm not saying that. Let's look at this. How about churches? Pastors are like, we never shut down. We never shut down, all this other kind of stuff. Or we should never shut down. The thing we have to look at, is there a time that we should? City puts ban on funerals in churches. 15 more die of Spanish influenza. These are some articles and some things that happened. These are some things that went on during that time period. Churches, and I'm going to get to some other ones, but churches and other things that were closed. Okay, public notice. Notice is hereby given in that order to prevent the spread of Spanish influenza. All schools, public and private churches, theaters, moving picture halls, pool rooms, and other places of amusement are closed. And lodge meetings are to be closed. What? You mean not even the Masons could be open? What's going on? Here it is. Not new, folks. Not new. It has happened before. But we don't know history, so we automatically... By the way, here's another thing that I'll tell you about. There are laws on the books in these cities. There were laws on the books in the cities where you couldn't spit on the sidewalk. Why? Because of this. Look what it says. Don't spit. See that? Why? Because people got sick, so you wonder why some of these laws are on the books. You're like, what in the world? Teaching by phone. School teaching by telephone is today's latest educational wrinkle in California. Look, quarantine on Spanish flu to be more rigid. Schools closed here due to Spanish flu. Hang on one second. Look, my wife had to bring me a jug of coffee, okay? So if I look like an old wino drinking coffee, it is coffee. It's not anything else, okay? Yes. That'd be nice. To be lifted Sunday. Health Board raises ban in effect since October 7th, and church services will be held as usual. Schools will be reopened on Monday. See? No, I think pastors need to make individual decisions for their own flock. That flock needs to come together. I think any pastor should allow his people, should say, stay home if you don't feel safe. Look at this. Number 1, keep away from sick people. Use your handkerchief when you cough or sneeze. Avoid crowded streetcars, trains, or houses. Look, this isn't new, folks. Please listen to me. I'm saying that this happened before. And you can believe it's all a government conspiracy, and that's fine. But I'm telling you, it's not new. It's new to us because we've never went through anything in our life like this. Don't spit on the floor. Wash your hands before eating. Keep your fingers out of your mouth. Avoid common drinking cups. Keep out of dusty places. What does that mean? Anyway, look at this one. Spanish flu gaining here. Officials talk of closing schools, theaters, churches. We're not above getting sick because we're Christians. And we're not above using common sense either. And God's not going to punish his children if they don't show up to the assembly, or they don't hold an assembly there like that for a few weeks because there's a major virus going through that people are getting sick. And if you get to live out in Texas where it's 950 degrees and everything fries on the sidewalk, praise the Lord, but I live in frozen tundra here. We don't get that here, okay? That's my point. Not everywhere is the same, and not everybody lives out in the middle of nowhere. Some of us live where there's a lot of people around. Can't help it. We don't all get to go live out in the country. We don't all get to go live out in the desert. Some of us live around people. And you're not a wicked sinner because you say, well, I think this is smart to follow. You're not a compromiser giving into the New World Order because you don't meet for a church a couple weeks. There is a time for righteous rebellion. I'm not saying that. There is a time for that. Seattle Daily Times. Churches, schools, shows, closed. Can you see how this is not against the church? Can we all agree that this is not specifically against churches? Can we all, David Ickes, are you with me? Can we all agree that this is not an order that was written by the governor of any state that said specifically only churches are in this order? Do we understand that? That if James LeBron or LeBron James or whatever his stupid name is, and any of those other guys out there and all these other athletes can't go play ball up and down the field and up and down the court and you don't get to watch them, that it's not just against churches? That people are losing billions of dollars? I mean, the economy is? I want to make sure that we have common sense. That we get that it's not just churches. I mean, it's common sense. Oh, I think it's an attack. Really? Because I think the basketball guy thinks, man, this is an attack on my basketball plan. But look at that. Do you think again, let's go back to our premise. We don't have to like it. It's okay that you don't like it. It's really okay. I want a poster like this. This is awesome. Coughs and sneezes spread diseases. I'm just showing you some pictures. We're going to get to some more articles because I want to show you some really interesting things. If you're wanting to stick around for another hour with me here. I might have made you mad already. You might want to get out of here. Watauga and all steps possible will be taken to avoid the spread of the disease. Meetings of all sorts are forbidden. Even Sunday school and church services in the village are being called off, and steps are being taken to discontinue the public schools of the county. The training school we put under quarantine. If it continues, avoid crowds of all kinds. That was written in 1918, not 2020. Hey, look. Some of you should remember this. When in quarantine, people who are in quarantine are not isolated if they have a Bell telephone. I love it. The Bell service brings cheer and encouragement to the sick and is of value in countless other ways. Friends, whether close or at hand or far away, can be easily reached because Bell service is universal service. Well, you have Bell, don't you? By the way, is social distancing new? We're going to look at that. You know, is it new? It isn't new. We'll get back to these pictures in a little while. How about this right here? Coronavirus, social distancing, a lesson learned from the Spanish flu epidemic. Surely this is from a fascist group. No, it's just a history of the Dayton Daily News. This is what happened. Look what this says. If you don't want to close up the shop with an epidemic of Spanish influenza, quit spitting on the floor. Quit it. Quit spitting on the floor. Let me get my jug of homemade cold brew. I need me another swig. Here we go. You ready? Quit spitting on the floor. Man, this stuff is like Red Bull. It gives you wings. Woo, that woman made this strong. In fall of 1918, as the Spanish influenza swept the globe, Dayton Public Health Commissioner A.O. Peters shut down schools, theaters, churches, soda fountains, pool rooms, and saloons, ordered the sick to quarantine, and advised people to avoid crowds. And quit spitting on the floor. I love it. I just want to keep saying that. Sound familiar, Ohio? Look at this. In large part, Governor Mike DeWine and Ohio Department of Health Director Dr. Amy Acton are using a playbook written more than a century ago. Look at this. 14 new cases of Spanish influenza are now quarantined in this city, but the disease, is a great majority of cases, is manifesting itself in mild form. Have you heard this before? According to the health officer, it is believed that the crisis is past, that there is but little occasion for further alarm concerning the threatened epidemic. However, reasonable precautions are urged. What is it? It's social distancing. It's not new. I love Fritch's Big Boy, by the way. Anyway. In 1918 and 19, the Spanish influenza pandemic killed 50 million people worldwide. We've seen that figure, 675,000. We have better technology now. We can shut things down better. We understand things better. Like now, no vaccine existed then. Then leaving public health authorities to use closures, quarantines, good hygiene, disinfectant, and social distancing. Sound familiar? It's not new. They used it before. They got through it. We'll get through it by God's grace. We don't like it. We don't have to like it. Okay, at the time, Ohio Governor James Cox, founder of the Dayton Daily News, decided to allow local jurisdictions to determine what closures would work best. And his team suggested local health authorities close public places to stop the virus. Open air activities such as ball games and other operations that summon people together in the open are not affected by the order, read a newspaper story from the time. The Spanish flu likely started in the 1918 at an army base in Kansas where 500 soldiers were hospitalized. Here's another one. The flu continued to infect soldiers at higher rates. Camp Sherman in Ross County saw 5,686 military personnel fall ill, with 1,777 dying. They turned the theater into a makeshift morgue. An early alarm about Spanish influenza was sounded the 23rd of September in the Dayton. Look, here it is. Churches, schools, movies, saloons ordered closed. There it is. Right? Again, we don't like it, but it's real. Here it is. Supplemental orders were issued Wednesday morning by Health Commissioner Peters, closing the saloons, soda fountains, and pool rooms. This action was taken immediately after a conference in which City Manager Barlow and health officials participated. This order is in addition to that issued Tuesday evening, closing schools, theaters, and churches. There it is. Okay. I mean, we could sit there and fight it if we want to. I'm not supporting vaccines. I'm not supporting those. What I'm telling you is that definitely if you don't want to take a vaccine, you should be careful about quarantining yourself against sick people. I don't take vaccines. I don't. I don't take flu shots or anything like that. The city used the quarantine order for the sick on September 30th. The only known preventative from the spread of illness, of disease, is complete isolation of the sick from the well. So then they went to allowing only one person to care for the sick in the household. So then that cut down the exposure. Caretakers wore gauze masks saturated with disinfectant, and family members used a milk alkaline antiseptic throat and nose wash to ward off the flu. There it is. Visiting nurses in Dayton worked overtime, averaging 15 calls a day. By the end of October, 3 of the 15 nurses in the city had fallen ill. We simply can't give nursing care to all So all we can do is to have the nurses instruct other members of the families and show them how to give the proper care. By the end of 1918, the disease was subsiding, but by then more than 500 Daytonans had died. Far more than were killed in the Great Dayton Flood, but up until the battle with COVID-19, I think very few people have ever heard of the Spanish flu. See, we don't know. We've never experienced anything like this before. So we don't know about what went on. We're ignorant of history largely. People in 1918 would have unfortunately been accustomed to diseases and early deaths and things we don't even think about today with modern medicine, drugs, and healthcare. But back then, Americans had strong unity around World War I, were accustomed to sacrifice and held a strong belief in science, said Amy Fairchild. There was an enormous amount of cooperation with social distancing measures. See? They practiced it then. Do you see that? And I think one of the things, listen to what's being said, and I think one of the things that we're seeing now is not just not being united, but having a polarized society. That I think a public health risk factor for pandemics too. When we have a lack of trust in the government, we have a lack of trust in science, multiple narratives that float around that can have the same kinds of credibility of being true or not. That can make a difference as well. See, we have so much distrust. We have so much distrust because we've been lied to by government. We've been lied to by the media. We have people, we have politicians we have doctors that have lied about things. We have politicians that have not told us the truth. Back then, the country was so united around the war that they banded together to deal with it. And they did deal with it. But now we see our neighbors as our enemies. We've become into such a place in America, so polarized, that half the country is against the other half of it, and we look at everybody with such an evil eye. We just do. And it's sad. But it's the truth. We look at with people, we look at people like that with such an evil eye that we just can't. We're losing our love for one another, folks. We just are. The Bible says, I want to show you something. Look at this. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. We got to be careful. I'm not blaming anybody for being vigilant. I'm not blaming anybody for being prudent. I'm not blaming anybody for that. What I'm saying is this is just the truth. And if you don't like it, you can lump it. And I'm not talking to anybody specifically. All right? I'm talking to all of us. It's just the flat out truth. The love of many shall wax cold. We're so busy thinking about ourselves and our personal liberties that we don't care if somebody else dies. as long as it's not us. Let that sink in for a second. Let's go to something else here. How about this one? Los Angeles Times. This isn't the first time a virus caused social panic. The Spanish flu did too. There were warnings by politicians and doctors that the pandemic was coming. Mandatory quarantines followed, along with skepticism by a public that felt the threat was all hype. Sound familiar? Does it sound familiar? Then the deaths started. This scenario is unfolding across South California as the region bunkers down against coronavirus and reported cases continue to rise. But the same sequence played out more than 100 years ago. Archives at the UCLA, the Huntington Library, and the city of Los Angeles capture the little-remembered history of how Los Angeles and other cities across the Southland weathered the deadly 1918 Spanish flu, which killed an estimated 50 million people worldwide and over 700,000. Well, we saw 650,000, maybe 700,000 is right. Through letters, newspaper clippings, city council minutes, diaries, and photos, these collections offer lessons from the past that historians can teach people today about how to confront coronavirus. Now, I already don't like the fact this person is from Loyola Marymount University, but that doesn't have anything to do with the actual facts. Who has had her students use archival material to write projects about the Spanish flu. Some of the topics they chose: the efficiency of wearing masks, the pressure on men to suffer silently, the toll that caring for the sick took on healthcare workers, seem pulled from debates over coronavirus today. These archives aren't readily accessible to non-academics, and copyright restrictions limit their use, but their caretakers pop up every couple years in the public sphere to calm collective nerves. Okay. Look at this. Importance. To avoid influenza. Avoid the person who coughs or sneezes without covering their mouth. Avoid the person who spits where it will spread disease. He is dangerous as well as indecent. I like it. Avoid crowds. They multiply your chances of catching influenza. When you cannot avoid crowded places, keep your mouth shut and breathe through your nose. If you see a person with red, watery eyes who is sneezing or blowing his nose, stay away from him. If any of your friends have a cold or are sick with influenza, do not associate with them. Stay out of doors as much as possible. So you wonder why the governors are saying, get outside. Now, Chicago and other places where they're draconian, they're saying not to. Minnesota is saying, get out as much as you can. Go hunting, fishing, hiking. Get outside. Why? Because that's what the sun has healing. I'm going to talk about that Wednesday. Healing in its wings. Healing in his wings. The Son of Righteousness and a picture of the sun. I want to talk about that, but we'll save that for Wednesday. I think I'm going to preach it Wednesday. Not on my broadcast, but we'll see. Stay out of doors as much as possible. As long as you avoid crowds, it is far better for you to go for a walk in the evening than to call on a friend or go to the theater. Keep all your rooms well ventilated. Avoid getting chilled when you are warm from work or other exercise. That's right. Avoid dusty places. Dust irritates the nose and throat and makes it easy for you to catch influenza. If smoking irritates your throat, stop it. Drink plenty of water. Eat enough, but not too much. Keep your bowels open. Well, yes, of course, keep your bowels open. Did you hear that, children? Keep your bowels open. David Ickes, I hope you heard that. You need to keep your bowels open. That's my favorite one. Keep your bowels open. If you wish to use additional precautions, ask your doctor. If you catch influenza, if you feel feverish and have a headache, backache, or cold in your head, consult a doctor at once. Stay in bed until you're absolutely well, at least 3 days. If you have influenza or any cold, avoid giving it to your family, friends, and others. Never cough or sneeze without covering your nose or mouth. Do not spit on sidewalks, floors, streetcars, or places where germs. Come on! In other words, pooping ain't easy if you have influenza. So you keep your bowels open. So your poop, so everything's going out. That's how it works. Pooping matters. Eat enough plain food. Boil your handkerchiefs after they are washed. Wow. Eat enough plain food, but not too much. And again, if you have influenza, keep your bowels open. Keep your bowels open, kids. Okay, so the chaos he's talking about here, okay? The exhibit ended with the Army telegram informing Miller's family that he died. Family member. So she's going through all these archives and she's seeing all this stuff. Life has been disrupted, but life is going on. So when people are saying things like, life will never return to the same again, that's not true. In 1918, they went through the same thing. In 1918, they went through the same exact thing. Life did return to normal. It did, and it will again. So by all means, keep your bowels open. A similar assortment of Spanish flu. Anyway, he talks about you could find these records. One example, at the height of LA's fight against the Spanish flu, over 100 white student nurses at Los Angeles resigned because the board supervisors had allowed African American women to work alongside them. No meetings. So they made them out to be devils because they didn't let them have meetings. Sound familiar? Los Angeles Health Commissioner was instrumental in lessening the effects of the Spanish flu on the city. So in other words, basically, I take my super tonic every day, though. I just want you to know I take it every day. Almost every day. Multiple times. Okay. So, how about, let's go to Wisconsin. This is 1918. All persons are notified of of the presence of this disease and on account of its communicable character are warned against visiting or coming in contact with those sick with it. All persons sick with this disease are prohibited from leaving the premises or coming in contact in any way with the general public. All persons are forbidden to remove, obscure, or mutilate this card or to interfere in any way with these restrictions under penalty of a fine, imprisonment as provided in Section 4608 of the statutes. Sounds kind of serious, doesn't it? Look at that. Important causes of death in Wisconsin, 1912. Heart disease. Wow, still was there, huh? Wow. Tuberculosis. Stillbirths. Wow. Bright's disease. That's what Spurgeon had. Violent accidents. That was in 1912, by the way. During the last 3 months of that year, nearly 103,000 Wisconsins were laid low by the disease, and 8,459 of them died of the flu or related causes, principally pneumonia. Unlike ordinary strands of influenza, the 1918 flu proved most deadly to those between the ages of 15 and 40, ordinarily the healthiest segment of the population. Yet Wisconsin fared better than most states, and a primary factor was the role of the state government. This quarantine sign from the era of the so-called Spanish flu documents both the historical event that devastated families, communities, and the state economy, as well as unique attitude towards public health and government authority. Wisconsin's response to the 1918 flu was the most centralized in the United States, and Wisconsinites complied remarkably well with official orders. By the time the first case of the Spanish flu arrived in Wisconsin, state residents had followed news reports of its devastating progress around the world. Wisconsin's first 6 cases were reported in Milwaukee on September 26. The disease spread rapidly inland from Lake Michigan, Port City. Milwaukee's first 4 deaths were recorded on October 2nd. On October 7th, there were 256 new cases and 9 more deaths in Milwaukee alone. 40 years of government attention to public health bolstered Wisconsin's responses. In 1876, the Wisconsin legislature created the State Board of Health and granted its board authority for guarding against the introduction of contagious diseases into the state and for the control and suppression thereof within the state. In 1918, the state official officer was Dr. Cornelius Harper, appointed in 1902 by his friend Governor Robert La Follette. Harper was steeped in the progressive tradition of activist state government. When highly contagious airborne epidemic arrived in Wisconsin, Harper was prepared to use the extraordinary powers of his office to blunt its impact. One such power was the age-old practice of quarantining goods, animals, or people believed to be carrying contagious diseases. With no medical treatment yet available for influenza, identifying and isolating infected people was one of the few effective public measures. Wisconsin health officials posted signs like the one at the left on buildings occupied by quarantined influenza victims. Okay, so in 1918, he ordered all public institutions in Wisconsin closed. Schools, theaters, saloons, churches, and places of public amusement statewide. Every public venue other than factories, offices, and workplaces in no other state was such a comprehensive order issued, and it stayed in effect until the epidemic burned itself out in late December. So, I mean, it was a while, right? They had to deal with it for a while. Harper's order was facilitated by a statewide system of local health officers. So they were kind of ready for it, something to happen. The public's strong support Oh, actually, the support of business leaders, as it turned out, was crucial in making Harper's orders stick. With only few exceptions, compliance with Harper's measures was extraordinary, as well as the level of volunteerism displayed by citizens willing to risk their health for the benefit of others. Idle teachers conducted a house-by-house canvass providing health information to the sick and collecting infection statistics. So they established makeshift hospitals. Yeah, that was 3 months, David. Yep. The public's strong support of prevention and relief efforts can be attributed to several factors. First, advanced awareness of the epidemic's arrival and likely severity. Second, on existing ethos of self-sacrifice generated by the ongoing war effort. Their swift response to limit the transmission of influenza certainly saved lives. The state death rate, among the lowest in the country, was 2.91 per 1,000 inhabitants, compared to the average 4.39. Although Wisconsin's death rate was highest in rural areas, which often lacked adequate health care and volunteer resources, and in crowded urban areas, Milwaukee had one of the lowest rates. Okay. And we're not going to have quite that much of an impact because we kind of have a little better understanding. So I don't think you're going to see that type of closure. Do I think things are going to be shut down till about May sometime? Yeah, I think so. I think you'll start to see things open up in May again. And I think you'll go through the summer, and then when the winter hits, they may do something again for a couple weeks. But it's not new. It's not new. Right? Well, there's another one. Let's see. How about Seattle? Let's go there. Is everybody with me still? I know it's kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Redundant maybe? But it's giving you an understanding, a historical understanding of what happened. I don't think we're going to be that drastic here where I'm at, Minnesota. So, New York City, I think you're going to see portions of the country start to open up. You're going to see portions of the country start to open up that don't, like the Dakotas have nothing. Most of Iowa has nothing. Most of Iowa has nothing. Most of the Dakotas have nothing. Northern California has almost nothing. All right? I think you'll see Minnesota within a few weeks start to kind of open up. Somebody asked me, do you think 5G is responsible? No, I think people have the flu and they're getting sick. I think they have a bad virus. That's what I think. I don't think it has anything to do with any conspiracies. I think people are probably actually really sick. That's what I think. Sorry if I bursted your bubble, but I really think that. Again, it's perspective. I'm not saying you have to like it. Well, David Ickes, do you remember in California with all that what Trump said? Do you remember what Trump said? He said California has a serious problem with the homeless months ago. Now look at California. You have all these homeless people out in California. Look at this. This is the Spanish flu time right here. So here's the thing. David Ickes, Trump said a ton of stuff about all the problem of all these people in California being homeless and they're not doing anything about it. Now look. Okay, here we go. As coronavirus spreads in 2020, here's how Seattle handled the 1918 flu that killed 1,513 people. This is Seattle. News of a deadly flu outbreak begins slowly in a country overseas. The news accelerates as illness spreads around the world, but in the United States it seems far away. Seem like recent headlines? The epidemic reaches our shores, and as numbers of infections and deaths dramatically increase in this country, government officials take drastic action. Emergency proclamations are made, quarantine locations are hastily assembled. The Spanish flu happened 101 years ago, in the fall of 1918 at the tail end of World War I. Yep. History doesn't repeat itself, but it sure moves around in circles, said Dr. Howard, director of the Center for History of Medicine at the University of Michigan. We keep saying it's not a matter of if we have an epidemic, it's a matter of when. The pediatrician is one of the okay, I'm not too worried about his comments there. Let's see. On March 5th, Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkan acquired broad new powers. All right, but look at this. Look at this. Don't get into crowds. Don't cough or sneeze without using a handkerchief. Get plenty of fresh air. When the symptoms of a cold appear, isolate yourself as far as possible from others. First there is a chill, then a fever, headache, backache, reddening of the eyes, aches all over the body, and general prostration. Persons so attacked should go to bed at once and call a physician. See? Not new. It's happened before. Schools, theaters, motion picture houses, churches, and dance halls closed by noon that day. The only public gatherings that would be permitted was in the open air. Hey, open air preaching. That sounds great. A memorable photo taken around the time shows a young man wearing what looks like a white surgical mask standing in front of a downtown Seattle theater. All theaters closed until further notice at request of mayor. There were those who believed the order heavy-handed. The city school superintendent said Hansen was getting hysterical. There you go. Check this picture out. Okay? But Hansen was a hardline law and order mayor. When a theater manager said there was little danger of the flu spreading audiences, Hansen replied, "Some will kick, but we would rather listen to a live kicker than bury him." When pastors complained about closing churches, Hansen said, "Religion, which won't keep for 2 weeks, is not worth having." Ouch. Ouch. Woo! Man. David Ickes. Did you hear that, David Ickes? Wow. Wow. Whoa. Who's on here? Give me some feedback about that comment. That mayor's right. Come on. That mayor was right. When pastors complained about closing churches, Hansen said, "Religion, which won't keep for 2 weeks, is not worth having." Wow. Come on now. Take me another swig of this cold brew. The Corona kicker. Think about that for a second. That's some straight talk. That's the real straight talk express, John McCain. Some of you will get that, some of you won't. That's okay. Locals took the closures in stride. By the next day, the Times headline was "No place to go, so Seattleites walk streets." Excuse me. Stores tried to find opportunity in the closures. Frederick and Nelson, the landmark department store, ran ads for Victrolas, an early record player. The theaters are closed, but Victor Talent brings the world's greatest musical entertainers to you right in your home. The city took drastic actions by October 24th, raising the fine for spitting on the sidewalk from $2 to $5. That's $81 in today's dollars. The Times reported 31 men on that day had been arrested for expectoration nuisance. There was also a $5 fine for not wearing a mask on a streetcar. Wow. Well, I would say this. You say stay at home if you're sick, forsake not the assembling of yourselves together. I agree with that. But you cannot ignore sickness all around you that is spreading. If people are getting sick, there's another factor into that. And that is, if people around you are vulnerable to that sickness, if you are spreading that sickness by large crowds, then I think it's something you have to consider. That's an outside thing. All I'm doing is showing you history, that this is not new. Now, I know that whole New World Order, Superman, fighting the New World Order, in my mom's basement, in my spandex, flying around with my cape on, is the spirit that we all have. But we can't ignore, I'm asking you not to ignore history. That's what I'm saying. Don't ignore history. Don't ignore the facts around you and act like they're not really there. So I'm saying caution is in order. It's not like a normal cold. You're not talking about going to church with a cold. The city then and now had to scramble to find some place for the flu patients. In 1918, Mayor Hansen asked the city council for $5,000 to turn the top floor of the old county courthouse for influenza patients. Anyway. Okay. In 1918, an ad running in this paper was for oil of hyomia that once inhaled promised to absolutely destroy the germs of influenza. It was composed of alcohol, liquid paraffin, and a lot of oil of eucalyptus. As trolley car conductor barring passengers not wearing masks, by October 29th, 6-ply gauze masks were mandatory in Seattle and mandatory in the state by the next day. Election officials and voters at a precinct November 5th all wearing masks with orders to keep doors and windows open so that fresh air would flow. People 100 years ago lined up outside the paper's headquarters at the Times Square to catch the latest news. To keep crowds from congregating, the paper announced, obedient to a request by the mayor, the paper will not bulletin the election results. Then 5 weeks after Mayor Hansen's ban on public gatherings, it was all over. The war ended on November 11th when armistice was announced. The Seattle Times front page, Seattle in ecstasy of joy of ending the world's worst war. The next day, the headline was influenza ban completely off. Theaters and schools reopened. Public gatherings were once again allowed. The flu lingered around in the winter months of 1919, and December 3rd was a second wave. In December. By December 10th, nearly 1,000 homes had quarantine placards posted on them. Resident, perhaps worried that the gathering bans and public closures they had come to detest might be enacted again, seemed eager and willing to do anything to help. In the public schools, attendance was more than 50% below normal enrollment, in part due to illness, but largely because worried parents kept their healthy children home. By late December, the second wave of the flu was largely gone. Markell says that once the coronavirus pandemic passes, if history repeats, we all experience global amnesia. Right? There's another one. So, the question is asked, where is the line that we have to draw if the government becomes too authoritarian? In what? Like everything? Because if you think the church is going to fight the ban that's on everything, it's ludicrous. It's ludicrous to think that's going to be a fight. It's ludicrous to think that that's going to work. It's ludicrous to think that's even a fight that we should be in. It makes no sense. Before eating, when you come home from work, wherever you come in from the street, you must wash properly. 3 times when washing your hands is of special importance. Last week, a 105-year-old man thought to be Spain's last living survivor of the 1918 pandemic warned the world to be careful amid the coronavirus outbreak. I don't want to see the same thing repeated. It claims so many lives. Here's another one. While medicine has advanced, the access to information has increased significantly since 1918. I mean, things aren't going to be the same as it was then, and even the worst things, and partly because things aren't as drastic as they were. We have better technology, we have better advances in things, all that kind of stuff. Right? So we can thank the Lord for that, for sure. And your urban areas are always going to be guaranteed to cure Spanish influenza. Boyer's Massage Parlor. Whoa. So anyway, we see it there. Here's another one from the History Channel. In the late summer of 1918, the devastating second wave of the Spanish flu arrived on American shores, carried by World War I doughboys returning home from Europe. The newly virulent virus spread first from Boston to New York and Philadelphia before traveling west. Sound familiar? See, Philadelphia, look at this. Philadelphia holds a parade, right? Check this out. By mid-September, the Spanish flu was spreading like wildfire through Army and naval installations in Philadelphia. But Wilmer Cruzen, Philadelphia's public health director, assured the public that the stricken soldiers were only suffering from the old-fashioned seasonal flu, and it would be contained before infecting the civilian population. Check this out. So look, they had this parade during that time. By mid-September, the Spanish flu is spreading. When the first civilian cases were reported on September 21st, local physicians worried that this could be the start of an epidemic. But this guy said that Philadelphians could lower their risk by catching the flu by staying warm, keeping their feet dry and their bowels open. Look at this. Cruzen refused to cancel the upcoming Liberty Loan Parade scheduled for September 28th. Barry writes that infectious disease experts warned Cruzen that the parade, which was expected to attract several 100,000 Philadelphians, would be a ready-made and flammable mass for conflagration. Cruzen insisted that the parade must go on since it would raise millions of dollars in war bonds, and he played down the danger of spreading the disease. On September 28th, the patriotic procession of soldiers, Boy Scouts, marching bands, and local dignitaries stretched 2 miles through the downtown Philadelphia with sidewalks packed with spectators. 72 hours after the parade, 31 Philadelphian hospitals were full, and 2,600 people were dead by the end of the week. The Liberty Loan Parade probably threw gasoline on the fire, says Denner, but it was already cooking along pretty well. How did St. Louis flatten the curve? So you've heard those terms before, right? The public health response in St. Louis couldn't have been more different. Even before the first case of Spanish flu had been reported in the city, Health Commissioner Dr. Max Starkloff had a local physicians on high alert and wrote an editorial in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch about the importance of avoiding crowds. When the flu outbreak at nearby military barracks first spread into St. Louis civilian population, Starkloff wasted no time closing the schools, shutting movie theaters, pool halls, banning all public gatherings. There was pushback from business owners, but Starkloff and the mayor held their ground. When infections swelled as expected, thousands of sick residents were treated at home by a network of volunteer nurses. Daner said because of these precautions, St. Louis public health officials were able to flatten the curve and keep the flu epidemic from exploding overnight as it did in Philadelphia. You see the difference? See the difference? It's that crush of new cases in such a short period of time that completely overwhelms the city's capacity, that magnifies whatever problems you're having. According to 2007 analysis of Spanish flu death records, the peak mortality rate in St. Louis was only 1/8 of Philadelphia's death rate at its worst. 1/8. Denner says the Midwestern city was hit particularly hard by a third wave of the Spanish flu. In San Francisco, health officials put their full faith behind gauze masks. California Governor William Steffens declared that it was patriotic duty of every citizen to wear a mask. They made it a law. They were charged with disturbing the peace if they didn't wear a mask. They were hardly effective at all, they said the masks were. Look at that mask. All right, but on November 21st, a whistle blast signaled the San Franciscans could finally take off their masks. But San Francisco's luck ran out. The third wave of the Spanish flu struck in January 1919, believing masks were what saved them the first time business and theater owners fought back against public gathering orders. As a result, San Francisco ended up suffering some of the highest death rates of 90%. Yes. So the truth is that social distancing did help. Yes, social distancing did help. I mean, it only makes sense, right? If you have terribly infectious diseases and you have large masses of crowds of 70,000 people meeting in arenas, if somebody's got that and it spreads that fast, there's a lot of people that are going to get sick. Now let's look at this. Social distancing and quarantine were used in the medieval times to fight the Black Death. Right, those that were concerned basically about dollars and getting everything back to normal. It's not just about money, folks. We can always make more money. But you can't get your life back. I'm not saying I agree with everything the government is doing right now. I'm not saying that I agree, and I definitely don't agree with that $2.2 trillion stimulus package. I don't agree with that either. So if you leave this broadcast thinking Pastor Cooley just believes in all this stuff and he's the government, no, you're missing my point. My point is, this is not unprecedented. In fact, it's way easier than the Spanish flu. And we're going to get through it. And it may be a little bit taxing for a while. But this too shall pass. Almost 700 years ago, the overwhelmed physicians and health officials fighting a devastating outbreak of bubonic plague in medieval Italy had no notion of viruses or bacteria, but they understood enough about the Black Death to implement some of the world's first anti-contagion measures. Starting in 1348, soon after the plague arrived in cities like Venice and Milan, city officials put emergency public health measures in place that foreshadow today's best practices of social distancing and disinfecting surfaces. They knew that you had to be careful with goods that are being traded, because the disease could spread on objects and surfaces, and that you tried your best to limit person-to-person contact. The Adriatic port city of Ragusa was the first to pass legislation requiring the mandatory quarantine of all incoming ships and trade caravans in order to screen for infection. The order, which miraculously survived in the Drumbovnik archives, reads that on July 27, 1377, the city's major council passed a law which stipulates that those who come from plague-infested areas shall not enter Ragusa or its district unless they spend a month on the islet of Makron or in the town of Kavdat for the purpose of disinfection. This isn't about questioning all of government's motives. This is about the fact that this is not new. This has happened before. And for people, everybody I hear talking about this is martial law, the government's taken over. They've already been running things, by the way, so I don't know what they're going to take over. And all this other stuff. You're acting like this has never happened. You're being dishonest with history. Now, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt and say you don't know it. But to act like this has never happened before and that we've never had worldwide sickness and we've never had things that go through, that's not true. And all you're doing is scaring people half to death. All you're doing is making them hyper vigilant over something they can't control. I mean, think about that for a minute. All people that are talking about that, and I get Ron Paul and I get everything he's saying. I agree with him on the government intrusion. But there is a time that you have to shut things down for health. There may be that time. Is there never a time in people's minds that you would ban public gatherings? Never? Is there never an appropriate time for that? Ever? I guess that's a question you have to ask. So anyway, the point is, they had a 30-day quarantine. They had a 40-day quarantine. Do they work? I think they do. I think they do. So, I mean, anyway, here's another article from 1666. Should we be concerned for our rights? Absolutely. I'm not saying that. But there's a time to use your brain too. And kind of discern some things. London. I don't even think we're going to have time to go through this because it's already 4 o'clock and I'm done here today. But maybe we'll go through this another day, this article. It's kind of interesting. They thought it was the end of the world. 1666, they thought it was the end of the world. So I'll leave it open here. If anybody has any questions they want to ask me just for a few minutes here, or give me your thoughts on what I presented to you here. Give me your thoughts on what you saw here. Some of you go ahead. I'll wait on the comment section here. I'll give you a few minutes and then I'll get out of here. But I'll play some songs here while I'm waiting. Okay, let's see some of the comments here. Let's see. Stephen, that's the verse I opened with, Ecclesiastes 1:9. Let's see. I don't know why you have 666 up there. I don't know what you mean by that, Carl. Anyway, right, Lisa. We have to be calm and think positive. That's right. Do you think recession is coming with a stimulus package like 2008? I think the recession will be pushed off because of the influx into the economy of money, but it's coming down the road. Yes, we're going to have it, but it won't be for a while. And the reason why is there's going to be an uptick in things in the third to the fourth quarter. There's going to be like an uptick of things probably. That's my guess. I'm not an economist, so I don't know, but that's my guess. All the money has to be used somewhere, and activity, when you rear up the engine again, when you start the engine back up and you get it moving, that's what's going to happen. It's going to flood the market with money, and inflation is what's going to be the problem.
My heart can sing when...
Kayla asked, do you think it's a sign of things to come? Do you think it's related to earthquakes, locusts, and the rivers that have been turning red? It seems like it is leading to our Lord coming back. I don't know. I don't know about that. I don't know. I don't know. I'm not sure. You know, obviously we live in the end times. We live in the last days. You know, I think we got some time to go, but that's my opinion. I don't know. We'll see. Remember, the Bible says, look up, for your redemption draweth nigh.
And I pause to remember a heartache here in but a stepping stone along a trail that's winding always upward. This troubled world is not my final home, but until then my heart will go on singing. Until then, with joy I'll carry on, until the day my eyes behold the city, until the day.
I am too. I'm convinced to do the social distancing for now as far as that goes, and to try to, keep the things, not meet as a church right now, together for right now in person. I'm convinced that's the right thing to do as of now. I'll tell you some things you can pray. Pray for people to be saved during this time. Pray for people's hearts to be ready to receive the gospel. Pray for churches. Pray for the needs of churches, because those things, we still have ministry to conduct. We still have needs to help other people with. We still have to keep going, no matter if we're meeting or not. The church has to still continue on to pay bills and to preach the gospel and to do all the things that they need to do, that we need to do. But also pray for those that are sick, and pray it warms up. Pray also for it to warm up. The sooner it gets hot and the sun comes out, the better off we'll be with all this stuff. You're going to see pockets of the country that are going to get better, because of the weather. As the sun comes out, it kills. No, I haven't heard that, Kayla, but it doesn't surprise me. Rabbis are antichrist. But, so we need to pray for good weather. Pray for good weather. Pray for good weather. Yeah, good time for global warming. Well, Carl, I can't help that you don't agree with me on everything. That's a fault that you have. We'll just pray that you get that right for sure. You'll admit one day you're wrong, Carl. That's okay. You'll admit one day you're wrong. Anyway, I'm teasing. But we need to pray for warmer weather to come. We need to pray for each other. We need to pray for I'm going to be visiting our church members, and visiting with them and everything like that. But you all need to stay in contact with one another. Our church, especially as Old Paths Baptist Church members, you ought to be video conferencing with each other, talking with each other, calling each other, texting, and staying in touch with one another. That ought to be happening. And if you know people that are isolated by themselves that suffer with anxiety or depression, stay in contact with them. Stay in contact with them. Keep in touch. It would be a good time for global warming. That's a good point. Anyway, but think about those things, and I hope they help you. I hope I just wanted to do this because I wanted it to give you a perspective that I haven't heard anybody really talking about. You know what I mean? Nobody's really like comparing it to what we've been through before because we don't know. We are so severed from our roots in history that we don't know that things like this have happened before. I'm not going to preach the keeping the kids series until our church is back together again. I don't want to. I like to be eyeball to eyeball with that series in dealing with our own church. So I'm not going to continue that series yet, as well as some of the other ones. I want to be there, with the church together, assembled, and deal with those things together. So I'll wait for that, but I'll be preaching other things for sure. And yeah, Lisa, that wouldn't be a bad idea. I mean, you could do that for sure. You can all email me whatever you'd like. Right. It's not I don't believe it's government oppression at this point. I believe it's being safe. I really do believe that. I do. I always have a skeptical eye. I always take a look. But from everything that I'm seeing right now, I think it's wisdom. I really do. I think it's wisdom at this point. We'll see. But I can't see why they'd make all this up like this. And they're not making up the deaths, the people dying, people sick. All that stuff. They're not making that up. But we should always keep our eyes open, yeah. And I think I honestly think what you're going to see is pockets of the country start to open up. You're going to see that. You're going to see that soon. It's not, I'm telling you, we're not that far away from that. In the places where there's not the trouble, you're going to see it. So anyway, so I'll send this out to everybody, and I'll put it on sermon audio a little bit later and let people listen to it, and hopefully it'll get to more people. And if anybody's mad at me, just send it to David Ickes, and we'll keep our eyes open, though. We will, and if something changes, hey, listen, I'll be the first to say something. But I think we need to use wisdom and discretion. And I almost read to you the Message Bible today. I wasn't going to talk about this. I was going to read the Message Bible because I was reading the Message Bible last night and I laughed so hard, I almost cried. It was so funny. But I'll have to read you some of those passages because they sound so funny. But we'll save that. But anyway. All right, everybody. God bless you all. Glad you were here. Hope it helps you get some perspective. Share it with your family members and friends. Those that think this is really it. This is the end. This is the complete takeover, and we're all going to be stuck in our houses forever. Try to help maybe give them some perspective. I know it doesn't take it all away, But what it does do is give us some understanding of it, okay? All right, everybody. God bless you. Have a good night.